Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the News Hour tonight, Ukraine and Russia agree to pause attacks on energy infrastructure in the years-long conflict.
The Trump administration continues to push back on the federal judiciary despite a rebuke from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
And congressional Democrats clash over how to oppose the president's agenda. We speak with Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer.
I am confident that we will bring Trump's popularity, numbers, and strength down if we keep at it and keep at it and keep at it.
Major funding for the PBS News Hour has been provided by
a law partner rediscovers her grandmother's artistry and creates a trust to keep the craft alive. A Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your passions, and the way you enrich your community. Life well planned.
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
At BDO, I feel like a true individual. People value me for me. They care about what I want, my needs, my career path. I matter here.
the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad. The Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together. Supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the News Hour. Today, for the first time in more than 3 years of war, Ukraine and Russia have both agreed to at least a partial ceasefire, stopping strikes on energy infrastructure for the next month.
And those 30 days could provide a much-needed respite to millions of Ukrainians who have often spent their nights in darkness and without heating. The announcement followed President Trump's call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky today, which Trump officials described as fantastic. Here's Nick Schifrin.
For more than 3 years, this has been the reality. Ukraine's cities going dark. A country of 37 million guided by flashlights. Targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure to try and cut civilians' light and heat to erode their willingness to support the war. But today, a deal agreed by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who wrote on X, one of the first steps toward fully ending the war could be ending strikes on energy and other civilian infrastructure. I supported this step, and Ukraine confirmed that we're ready to implement it. And announced by the White House.
We are at a place of peace. We're at a partial ceasefire, and we're moving towards a full ceasefire and a long-standing peace in this conflict. And that's great news for the American public.
Presidents Trump and Zelensky spoke for an hour, and technical teams will meet in Saudi Arabia this weekend to try and extend the truce to the Black Sea, where Ukrainian naval drones have successfully sunk or pushed out Russia's fleet. But the U.S. statement also raised Ukraine's nuclear power plants and suggested the U.S. could take them over.
The United States could be very helpful in running those plants with its electricity and utility expertise. American ownership of those plants would be the best protection for that infrastructure and support for Ukrainian energy infrastructure.
That could include the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, Europe's largest, and since days into the war, occupied by Russia. Ukraine operates 3 additional nuclear power plants, which provide an increasingly large amount of Ukraine's power. Because of more than 1,000 Russian attacks on Ukraine's infrastructure, including the massive Hakhovka hydroelectric dam flooding entire cities and towns. The attacks have destroyed half of Ukraine's electricity capacity and caused $14.6 billion in damage. As I saw in September 2023, when the father-daughter team of Alexander and Daria showed me how they were trying to fix this plant and provide rays of hope for the country's future.
It's kind of like the brave ones who bring the light, because that's what they actually do. That's our future. We want to be free.
But even with a partial ceasefire, that freedom is elusive. Overnight, Ukraine launched its own attacks on Russian energy infrastructure. And Russia launched a large barrage. Zelensky today asked President Trump for more air defense, particularly the Patriot defense system, which Ukrainian soldiers need to shoot down Russian ballistic missiles. President Trump agreed to find what was available, particularly in Europe, which has tried to provide Ukraine its own air defenses.
But providing Ukraine that air defense is easier said than done. European officials tell me they want to help, but are worried about protecting their own capitals and don't have any surplus. The same for the U.S. Even the Biden administration decided it couldn't give Ukraine all the air defense it requested, but it would have come because it would have come at the cost of U.S. military readiness.
Nick, bottom line here, how close are we to a larger ceasefire?
As we said in our piece, Trump and Zelensky both said that they would work toward expanding the ceasefire into the Black Sea. But the two sides are still far apart on a fundamental point that we saw come out of the Putin-Trump phone call, and that was yesterday. President Putin's readout after that call said that he wouldn't expand the ceasefire until Ukraine stopped arming and mobilizing its soldiers and the complete cessation, quote unquote, of any foreign military and intelligence assistance. And Putin also said that the U.S. would have to address the root cause of the crisis. That means moving troops out of Eastern Europe and not allowing Ukraine into NATO. None of that is acceptable to Ukraine. None of that is acceptable to Western Europe, and none of that's acceptable to President Trump, because he has said specifically that Europe would have to provide Ukraine the security guarantees.
We saw in the readout from U.S. officials about that call that President Trump asked President Zelensky about one of the most notorious parts of the war, something you reported a lot on. What should we know about that?
Yeah, the readout went out of its way to say that President Trump raised the issue of the tens of thousands of Ukrainian children who have been kidnapped by Russian forces since the beginning of this war. The statement reads, quote, President Trump promised to work closely with both parties to help make sure those children were returned home. But here's the thing. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce today confirmed for the first time that the State Department cut off the funding for an outside program that was tracking those children. Bruce did confirm that the data for that program still exists, despite some Democratic lawmakers' concern that the data had been deleted. But the bottom line is the organizers of that program always believed that they were conducting a search and rescue mission for all of those children who were trapped inside Russia. And unless Secretary of State Rubio brings back that funding and brings it back soon, frankly, that effort that they've been doing for the last few years, that effort will die.
We know you'll continue to follow that story as well. Nick Schifrin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We start the day's other headlines in the Middle East, where Israel says it launched a limited ground operation in Gaza after abruptly ending a 2-month ceasefire with Hamas. The Israeli military claims to have recaptured part of a key corridor that bisects Gaza after withdrawing as part of the truce. By air, a wave of Israeli attacks hit sites in Gaza for a second day in a row. Several UN employees were rushed to a hospital after a strike on a UN compound killed one worker and severely injured at least 5 others. Israel denied responsibility. A UN official said it's under investigation.
In my opinion, this was not an accident. It cannot be categorized as an accident. It is at least an incident. UN personnel and its premises must be protected by all sides.
Meantime, in Israel, ultra-nationalist Itamar Ben-Gvir regained his position as national security minister. He had left the government coalition in January to protest the ceasefire with Hamas. A federal judge is moving the case of Columbia University graduate Mahmoud Khalil to New Jersey. That's because the 30-year-old was being held there when his lawyers first challenged the legality of his detention. Khalil is currently at a facility in Louisiana as U.S. officials seek to deport him. ICE agents arrested Khalil earlier this month for his role in pro-Palestinian protests on campus. He is a legal U.S. resident with no criminal record, and his lawyers say the grounds for his arrest violate his First Amendment rights. The White House says it's suspending $175 million in federal funding for the University of Pennsylvania. It follows an investigation into Penn's swimming program that focused on Leah Thomas, an openly transgender athlete who last competed for the school in 2022. A Penn spokesperson says they have not received details of the action, but in a statement added, quote, "We have been in the past and remain today in full compliance with the regulations that apply to not only Penn, but all of our NCAA and Ivy League peer institutions." Penn joins Columbia University as the second Ivy League school to be targeted by the administration in the last 2 weeks. A jury in North Dakota found Greenpeace liable for defamation and other claims related to protests over the Dakota Access Pipeline. The environmental group must pay hundreds of millions of dollars to the Dallas-based Energy Transfer Company and its subsidiary Dakota Access. The lawsuit accuses Greenpeace of defamation, trespass, nuisance, and other acts during the 2016 and 2017 protests near the reservation of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. Activists oppose the oil pipeline's construction as a risk to the local water supply. Greenpeace says its employees had little to no involvement in the protests. The Federal Reserve held its benchmark interest rate steady today for the second meeting in a row. But even as it projects slower economic growth, the central bank signaled it still expects to cut rates twice this year. At a news conference today, Fed Chair Jerome Powell called the outlook uncertain. He explicitly cited tariffs as a potential obstacle to the Fed's effort to bring inflation down to its 2% goal.
Goods inflation moved up pretty significantly in the first 2 months of the year. Trying to track that back to actual tariff increases, given what was tariffed and what was not, very, very challenging. So some of it, the answer is clearly some of it. A good part of it is coming from tariffs.
Those tariff concerns took a backseat on Wall Street today as investors focused instead on the Fed's commitment to further rate cuts. The Dow Jones Industrial Average added nearly 400 points on the day. The Nasdaq jumped nearly 250 points. The S&P 500 added 60 points, or about 1%. Still to come on the News Hour, we speak with Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer about his party's infighting over how to oppose the White House, how the Trump administration's changes to Social Security could limit access to benefits for millions, and one Michigan county tries to heal political divisions 5 years after the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic.
This is the PBS News Hour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
A federal judge is giving the Trump administration more time to provide critical information about deportation flights that took place this past weekend. U.S. District Judge James Boasberg is trying to determine whether the administration defied his order as he faces ongoing attacks from President Trump and his administration.
I don't know who the judge is, but he's radical left. He was Obama appointed. And he actually said we shouldn't be able to take criminals, killers, murderers, horrible, the worst people, gang members, gang leaders, that we shouldn't be allowed to take them out of our country.
Our White House correspondent, Laura Barone-Lopez, has been reporting on this and joins us now. So, Laura, Chief Justice John Roberts issued a rare statement, as you know, yesterday in response to President Trump, but it doesn't appear to have convinced the administration to stop its attacks on the federal courts.
No, as we heard there, the president was still attacking Judge Boasberg. And also today, President Trump started fundraising on the idea of impeaching Judge Boasberg, sending that out to his many supporters. And that also comes as Elon Musk, the special government employee, has repeatedly been posting on X that congressional Republicans should move forward with impeaching Judge Boasberg specifically. And just a quick fact check there on some of the things that the president has been claiming is that Boasberg was first appointed by George W. Bush and then later elevated to the federal bench by President Obama. And Boasberg has also made some favorable rulings for President Trump in the past, namely in 2017, blocking the release of President Trump's tax returns. And he was confirmed to the Senate 96-0.
And the judge gave the administration more time, but it appears his patience is growing a little thin here with this warning that he's issued. What did he say?
So Judge Boasberg was clearly not happy with the administration's stonewalling of this information. He said in a statement today that the court seeks this information about the flights not as a micromanaged and unnecessary judicial fishing expedition, but to determine if the government deliberately flouted his order issued on March 15th, 2025, and if so, what the consequences should be. So again, he's trying to figure out whether or not, when they moved forward with these deportation flights, if they essentially defied his order. Judge Boasberg also referenced Justice Roberts' statement saying that the Supreme Court has made crystal clear that if the Trump administration is not happy with his ultimate decision in this case, that the proper route is to appeal it.
So when the administration refuses to answer the judge's questions, what's their justification? What actual argument are they making in court?
So in a filing today, the Trump administration said that it may very well invoke what is known as the state secrets privilege, essentially refusing to disclose information about these deportation flights, saying that it because of the sensitive information about the operations. Now, that state secrets privilege is not often used, Jeff, and it's almost always used only in terms of classified information. And Judge Boasberg, in a response today to the administration, actually said, to date, the administration has not at all said that they consider this information classified. Also, the president and the White House have repeatedly claimed that Judge Boasberg is trying to stop the president from deporting criminals. That's just not true, Jeff, because the president has authority to deport criminals as he sees fit under current immigration law. Judge Boasberg is just simply trying to figure out whether or not the president's invocation of alien enemies is actually lawful.
Got it. And there's this separate case where the administration and Elon Musk's team were sued today for attempting to take control of the independent agency, the U.S. Institute for Peace. Where does all of that stand?
So the U.S. Institute for Peace was established by Congress 40 years ago, and it operates as this independent think tank that tries to prevent and resolve international conflicts. And so over the course of the last 4 days, Elon Musk and his team Doge have tried to take control of that entity, bringing FBI agents, bringing law enforcement to gain entry. And in a hearing today where Judge Beryl Howell was hearing a lawsuit brought by former employees, Judge Howell was pretty incredulous, saying to the government that it appeared as though Doge terrorized staff. She said that she was, quote, offended on behalf of the American citizens working at USIP. She felt as though they were treated abominably and because they were threatened with criminal investigations. But ultimately, Judge Howell denied the request by these employees for Doge to not be able to take control, essentially saying that she wasn't sure that the merits of the case warranted a temporary block on Doge.
Laura Barone-Lopez, our thanks to you as always.
Thank you.
For more on the legal ramifications of the Trump administration's showdown with the judiciary, I'm joined now by Steve Vladeck. He's a constitutional law professor at Georgetown University. Steve, welcome back. Let's just pick up where Laura left off there. This extraordinary back and forth between the Department of Justice and Judge Boasberg here. The judge wants more information on the flights. Department of Justice has until Thursday to produce it. When you look at this, does this seem to be an administration in defiance of the judge's orders?
I don't know that the administration really has reached the point of open defiance. I think it's more like what my 6-year-old does, which is, testing the boundaries of the authority, pushing to see how much they can get away with, pushing to see sort of where the line is, but while preserving plausible deniability that they're not actually saying they can't be bound. And I think that's part of why you see this back and forth between President Trump and Chief Justice Roberts. And, where this ends, I think, is really the big question now. We've heard just late this afternoon, the D.C. Circuit has scheduled arguments in the government's effort to shut down Judge Boasberg for next Monday. So, I don't know that we're at the outright defiance stage yet, but I do think this is more resistance from the executive branch than we've seen, certainly in our lifetime and perhaps ever.
In seeking to test those boundaries, let me put to you what the administration says, because they argue they have absolute constitutional right to protect national security, to conduct foreign policy in the way they see fit. They see these deportation flights as part of that effort. Is that a sound argument that the president has absolute power on this front?
So no, I mean, the Alien Enemy Act of 1798, if we just look at some of its historical invocations, take World War II. I mean, World War II, a moment where President Roosevelt had as strong an argument for whatever authority the Constitution could possibly provide. And instead, he relied upon the statute, not just as a basis for detaining and removing German and Italian alien enemies, but for holding hearings. I mean, there are literally hundreds of reported judicial decisions from World War II where individuals who were picked up, who were held as alien enemies, said, hey, I'm not actually German, I'm Swiss, or I'm not Italian, I'm actually American. And courts scrutinized the basis for the government's behavior. If that was what was required in the middle of World War II in 1944, hard to see how less is required here in 2025 when it's not remotely as clear that the president's national security powers are even that strongly implicated.
So you've said it doesn't seem the administration is in open defiance of the judge's orders right now, but President Trump was asked in an interview last night about whether he would ever defy a judge's orders. Here's what he had to say.
I never did defy a court order.
And you wouldn't in the future?
No, you can't do that. However, we have bad judges. We have very bad judges. And these are judges that shouldn't be allowed. I think at a certain point, you have to start looking at what do you do when you have a rogue judge. The judge that we're talking about, you look at his other rulings, I mean, rulings unrelated. But having to do with me, he's a lunatic.
Steve, what the president's saying here is he wouldn't defy a court order, but some judges, he says, are bad. They are rogue. What do you take away from that answer?
I mean, I think we should point out a couple things. First, the number of cases President Trump is losing before the number of judges he's losing them in front of, that's an awfully large number of rogue judges. Perhaps the real problem is that we have a rogue administration. But second, and I think, Chief Justice Roberts chose his words very carefully in the statement he issued yesterday, which is the remedy our legal system provides for individual, trial level district court judges who get things wrong is the remedy of appeal. That's what the Biden administration did when so many of its policies were blocked by, hand-picked, right-wing judges in Texas. And it's what every president has done going all the way back to the founding. So I think part of the problem here is that you can believe that a judicial decision is wrong. You can even believe that a judge is rogue, although I think the evidence here is lacking. But the remedy for all of that behavior is not to undermine the judge, is not to threaten his security, is not to call for his impeachment. The remedy is to let the legal system do what the legal system does, which is correct erroneous rulings on appeal. And maybe the judge is actually not wrong. And maybe the appellate courts side with Judge Boasberg in this case.
Just to underscore what we're seeing at this moment, because you mentioned Chief Justice John Roberts, he was very careful in his wording. Another part of his statement he issued said, it's not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision, when referring to President Trump and others' calls for judges to be impeached. For the Chief Justice to choose to weigh in, to do so publicly, how significant is that?
It's really quite remarkable. And it's remarkable both that the Chief Justice chose to weigh in and how quickly he did. I mean, President Trump just, I think, first publicly called for the impeachment of Chief Judge Boasberg on Monday. And by Tuesday, you have Chief Justice Roberts, who, does nothing without deliberation, issuing the statement. I think it's a striking concession by the Chief Justice that these are not ordinary times. And frankly, I think it's a message, not to President Trump, but rather to, every district judge in the country, that the Chief Justice has their back, and to us, the American people, that, whatever you think of the courts, whatever you think of the Supreme Court today, our system is predicated on the idea that the courts get to interpret the law, and that if they get it wrong, the right remedy is to appeal. And if the Supreme Court gets it wrong, that's when we talk about what Congress can do. Can we amend the Constitution? The right remedy is not for an individual president to be able to say, I don't agree with this decision, so I'm not going to follow it. Otherwise, then you have a government not of laws. You have a government of one person. And that's exactly what the Constitution set up to avoid.
Steve Vladeck, professor of constitutional law at Georgetown University. Always great to speak with you. Thank you so much for making the time.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Democrats have few options for challenging President Trump and the GOP majorities in the House and Senate. But some on the left say they had a chance to do just that last week when Senate Republicans needed votes from their Democratic colleagues to pass the government funding bill. The top Democrat, Senator Chuck Schumer, however, voted with the GOP and supplied the needed votes, angering many in his party.
Let me be clear. In my time in Congress, never, ever has one party written partisan, full-year appropriations bills for all of government and expected the other party to go along without any input.
I would have liked to see, when Chuck Schumer had leverage here, to say we need A, B, C, and D for the Democratic Party and force the Republicans to meet him halfway.
To see Senate Democrats even consider acquiescing to Elon Musk, I think it is a huge slap in the face, and I think that there's a wide sense of betrayal if things proceed as currently planned.
I myself don't give away anything for nothing, and I think that's what happened the other day.
We spoke with Senator Schumer earlier today about that criticism, Democrats' path forward, and his new book, Anti-Semitism in America, a Warning. Leader Schumer, welcome back to the News Hour.
Glad to be back.
I want to start with your support of the GOP funding bill and the criticism that you have received as a result. I know that you maintain that a shutdown would have been far worse than passing the Republican bill. What do you see that the vast majority of Hill Democrats don't see? Why are they wrong in saying that you should have blocked it?
Well, Jeff, I knew when I made my decision there'd be a lot of people who disagreed with it. But I felt it was imperative that I do. We had an awful choice, a Hobson's choice, between a CR bill, which had no Democratic input, a continuing resolution to fund the government, and a government shutdown. As bad as the CR bill was, the shutdown, I'd say, would be 15, 20 times worse, and let me explain. In a shutdown, the whole government shuts down, and then the executive branch solely determines what is, quote, essential and what is not essential. So they could say on day 2 of the shutdown, SNAP, food for kids, not essential. On day 4, no transit funds, mass transit or other, are essential. We'll only declare as essential in the transportation bill air traffic controllers. On day 6, Medicaid, half of it not essential. We can cut Medicaid, cut rural hospitals, cut community health centers. And who has the power to do this? The executive. The courts have ruled that they have no say, that the executive makes the sole determination. Now, in the old days with the shutdown, they might do little things around the edges. But look who's in charge now. Musk, Doge, and probably worst of all, this man Vogt, you spell his name V-O-G-H-T, he's in charge of OMB, which determines the shutdown. They want to slash the federal government. They want to cut it in half. Also, they can give tax breaks to their billionaire friends. And making it even worse, there's no exit strategy. In other words, how long do you stay in the shutdown? It's totally up to those evil people who hate the federal government, who hate all the good things that we have been able to do. One of the Republican senators told a Democratic senator, if you go in a shutdown, we'll be in it for 6-9 months until we destroy the federal government. So while certainly the CR was bad, when you just had those two choices, in my view, the shutdown had to be avoided.
Well, when you hear the governor of Pennsylvania say that you squandered your leverage, or Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi saying that you gave up the votes and got nothing in return, how does that strike you? There are Democrats who say that if the government had shut down, you force Republicans to own it. All the pain that Americans would feel that you just described, Republicans would pay the political price. Why not be as tactically ruthless as Republicans have shown themselves to be?
Well, first, there was no choice. The Republicans had given us, when they sent it over from the House, just two choices, CR as is or shutdown. There was no other choice. But second, if you think that these Republicans would come to us and say, oh, we shouldn't have shut down the food stamps. We shouldn't have shut down Medicaid. We shouldn't have slashed the federal government. I don't think that's at all an accurate reading of who they are and what they are. And the danger that my prognosis is correct, which I believe it is, was so great in terms of destruction, they could furlough employees forever and just have the federal government shrink to half its size en masse. That would have been the worst alternative. And there was to rely on Republicans. Oh, we surrender, we'll come to the table because what we're doing is bad. Doesn't make sense to me.
Beyond the questions about this bill, there are deeper questions, as you well know, about the approach. The sense among Democrats that the Donald Trump of this second term is more emboldened, more defiant, more divisive, more dangerous, many Democrats believe, than the Donald Trump of the first, and that Democrats appear divided and ill-equipped
I believe that
to put up a fight.
I believe that, too.
So what's the strategy to meet the moment?
Look, okay, so there were divisions, as I said. I knew that many people would disagree with me. I felt, Jeff, as a leader, my job, if there was such danger, such tragedy, such horror, a little bit around the curve, that I, as leader, had the obligation to make sure that didn't happen, even though I knew there'd be disagreement. But going forward, we are all united, Hakeem and I and all of us. And what are we united doing? Focusing on how bad Trump is.
Channeling what I would imagine would be some of the pushback from the Democratic base, it would be that naming and shaming with Donald Trump doesn't work. That's what Democrats have done for the past 2 years. In this last election, he won the popular vote, the Electoral College, every battleground state. So, the rules of political gravity, press conferences and bold statements and coordinated tweets, it doesn't work. I mean, what does the fight look like?
We're going to go after. We're going after him in every way. And by the way, the people before who said he'd be shamed and come to the table, that's the exact opposite of what that is. So you can't have it both ways. But I would say this. In 2017, when he was last here, Nancy Pelosi and I said we're going to go after him on health care. He was very unpopular with that. We're going to go after him on tax breaks for the rich. And then we won the House and picked up some seats in the Senate in 2018. Same thing is going to happen now. And we're going to go after him in so many different ways. We are doing much better on the social media, led by Cory Booker and Tina Smith in our House. And so we're reaching people who were not reached before. We are mobilizing in New York. We have people going to the Republican districts and going after these Republicans who are voting for this and forcing them to either change their vote or face the consequences. This is a long, relentless fight that we fight every day. And I am confident that we will bring Trump's popularity, numbers, and strength down if we keep at it and keep at it and keep at it.
There are those who believe that we are, in real time, living through an assault on the constitutional order. Do you believe that we are in a constitutional crisis right now?
Yes, our democracy is at risk because Donald Trump shows that he wishes to violate the laws in many, many different ways. The good news here is we did put 235 judges, progressive judges not under the control of Trump last year on the bench, and they are ruling against Trump time after time after time. And we hope that the appellate courts, when it gets up there, and the Supreme Court will uphold those rulings. They restored the money to NIH. They required that 8,000 federal employees have to come back. We're in over 100 lawsuits against them, and we are having a good deal of success. It's only at the lower court level right now.
Let's talk about your new book out now, Anti-Semitism in America. That's the title of the book. You were the highest-ranking Jewish elected official in America ever, and you write that you once felt that your Jewish identity could be worn lightly, but that you now feel it's your duty to alert our country to the rising tide of anti-Semitism. There are a number of audiences for this book, but you have a particular message for people on the political left. What is it?
So my book is aimed at 5 groups. First, my generation, to show people, I know you're feeling alone. Jews tend to feel alone in these times. We're all united and in solidarity. Second, to their children, our children, the children of our generation. They're pro-Israel, they are pro-Jewish, but they don't know the history, the struggles we've had. Third is aimed at non-Jews of goodwill who, are friendly with Jewish people, and they know anti-Semitism's around, but they tend to think, oh, it's not that bad. Why are they making such a fuss? They don't carry 5,000 years of Jewish history on their back. Fourth is the left. There's always been vicious anti-Semitism on the right. In fact, I was within 30 feet of the hooligans who invaded the Capitol on January 6th, and one of them said, "There's the big Jew. Let's go get him." They wore sweatshirts that said 6 million was not enough. But on the left, it's in a different way. It is a little more subtle, but it's equally harmful. Because when people, legitimate criticism of Israel, fine, I do it. I've gotten some people in the Jewish community mad because I have done it. But crossing it over, going on a subway car and saying, all right, who's a Zionist on this subway car? Stand up, we want to get you out of the subway car. Telling people that Jewish people are vicious and nasty and horrible and exploiters. These kinds of things have created such huge problems for us in the past that I warn the left, be really careful. Don't let that anti-Israel criticism slide into anti-Semitic criticism, which it all too often does. The final group, by the way, I'd like to read it, is the kids of America, the younger people of America. I'd like every college to have this book and have their students read it, every high school. Do you know that 20% of people under 25 believe the Holocaust was a myth? Another 50% don't even know what the Holocaust was. And so we need education, because that has always been one of the greatest antidotes against anti-Semitism, teaching people the actual truth.
In the Oval Office days ago, President Trump condemned you, saying that you aren't Jewish anymore. He called you a Palestinian, using that word as an insult. In the past, he has questioned why Jewish Americans would vote for the Democratic Party, which many people see as deeply offensive. And yet the White House makes claims of alleged anti-Semitism on college campuses as a way of cracking down on universities. How does that strike you?
It strikes me as Donald Trump has always regarded Jews as transactional, people he can use. He regards them, he needs money, he needs votes. He can use the charge of anti-Semitism, even, going way beyond where it is. And he's done lots of things that encourage other anti-Semites. He sat down with this guy Fuentes, one of the greatest anti-Semites in America, when in Charlottesville, when they rioted against the Jews and wanted to harass or even burn down a temple. He said both sides have merit. He has allies who have this great replacement theory, which is an anti-Semitic theory which says the Jews are trying to bring immigrants into America so it'll no longer be white. And so far too often Donald Trump has just encouraged or turned the other eye when there are anti-Semites around. As for calling me a Palestinian, don't tell my mother.
The book is Anti-Semitism in America, A Warning. Its author, Senator Chuck Schumer. Thanks again for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Good to be here. Good to be here. Thank you.
Significant changes will be coming for Social Security recipients starting on March 31st. Millions of Americans will no longer be able to verify their identity over the phone, creating a challenge for older Americans and those with disabilities. Stephanie Sy joins us now with more.
This latest move by the Trump administration will require new and existing recipients to either verify themselves online or have their IDs verified in person, even while more than 40 field offices are slated to be shut down by the Department of Government Efficiency. The changes are aimed at addressing the potential for fraudulent claims and improper payments, which amounted to $72 billion between 2015 to 2022. That's less than 1% of all the benefits dispersed during that time period. Advocates are raising concerns about the burden this could place on an already vulnerable population. For more on what this means going forward, I'm joined by Kathleen Romick, Director of Social Security and Disability Policy for the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Kathleen, thank you so much for joining the News Hour. So it seems the biggest change here is getting rid of the option to verify one's identity by phone. Who will that impact the most?
It's going to impact anyone who struggles with the online verification system that SSA has. So that could include people who are just not comfortable using online services, which often does include older people and people with disabilities, which are the main populations that the Social Security Administration serves. It also means people who are not allowed to open a My Social Security account. So, for example, children, their families will have to visit a Social Security office in person to authenticate their identities and to do business with the agency. It also affects people who perhaps don't have a driver's license or don't have a smartphone in order to use those online authentication tools.
And of course, it's not just the elderly. There are 72.5 million Americans who receive these benefits, including children. I am curious how one does verify an ID by phone. The implication from the administration here is that that isn't a very secure way of verifying identification. Does this fix that?
The way that typically identities are authenticated by phone is by asking questions that only the person with that identity would be able to answer. So this is very commonly used by the private financial industry as well. You know, when you have trouble logging into your bank account or your mortgage lender's account, then you would typically call and sort out any problems over the phone, and they'd ask you these knowledge-based questions. So that's what SSA has been doing, and it's pretty common practice. It's not perfect, but no identity proofing method is perfect.
So at the same time as these new requirements are set to go into effect, you have reports of DOJ closing field offices, particularly in the South. They're also letting go of thousands of employees. The agency says these offices weren't used much since online virtual meetings became more popular and should be consolidated to save costs. What do you say to that?
I think that anytime a field office closes to the public, it's going to have an impact on the people who live in that area. There's research that even shows that people are less likely to get the Social Security disability benefits that they have earned and that they are eligible for if a field office in their area closes.
We should say that we did reach out to Trump administration officials to be interviewed on the topic, and they did pass on that today. But they have also announced other changes in these reforms, including announcing plans to expedite processing, for example, of direct deposit changes to 1 business day. It was 30 days. Isn't that a win for Social Security recipients?
Well, if you are able to authenticate your identity online and make those changes online, then sure, faster processing makes sense. But the fact is, if you do have to go into a Social Security field office, as this new policy requires, then it's going to take you over a month to make that change. And that's because there's already a 2-hour hold time on the phone to get a call back from the Social Security Administration to make an appointment, and then over a month-long wait on average to get an appointment in a field office.
Groups like the AARP have long called on Congress to provide more resources to improving customer service at this administration, saying processing time for disability claims have doubled in just the past 5 years. Aren't changes due? And if so, what changes do you think should be prioritized?
Well, the reason that it's taking the Social Security Administration longer to process disability claims and too long to answer the phone and to make appointments with people is because there are already not enough staff members working at SSA. And that's because of years of underfunding. And so the Trump administration is actually moving to double down on those staff cuts. They're planning for another 7,000 staff cuts at the Social Security Administration this year. So what that's going to mean is fewer people answering the phones, fewer people taking appointments, fewer people processing claims. And that's going to mean longer delays in each one of those areas. And it's going to make it harder for applicants and beneficiaries to access their benefits. And it's not just beneficiaries either, but it's going to affect people who are trying to access their Social Security statement, people who need a replacement Social Security card because they're seeking a job or just got married. These services affect everyone.
Kathleen Romig with the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Five years after the COVID pandemic, the effects on our politics, public health, and civic life continue to be felt across many communities. As part of her ongoing reporting project, America at a Crossroads, Judy Woodruff recently traveled to southeastern Michigan to find out how divisions that emerged during the pandemic continue to play out today.
Sunday morning service at Second Baptist Church in Ypsilanti. A celebration of life and faith. Years after first weathering the storm of the pandemic. Pastor George Wattles.
We had one of our members who died early, a man who was an integral part of our church, an auditor and a trustee. He was one of the first people in Michigan who passed away from COVID. So we were immediately impacted by the reality of how this was going to impact our community. And then the tidal wave begun.
About 15 miles to the south in the small city of Milan,
This is blending out really well. It is. Yeah.
Ashley St. Clair's salon and tattoo parlor had been up and running for only 6 months when everything shut down.
Salons, tattoo shops, massage parlors, we all had to shut down end of day that day. So I came in, told my husband, this is your last client of the day, and we all giggled and said, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah, because they're going to make hamburgers tonight.
A little to the east, mother of two, Holly Valade, remembers the fear of those early days and being thankful officials had stepped in to keep the public safe.
I was grateful that they were making the decisions they were making. It was a scary time. As time went on, you start to do your own research. You start to kind of watch what's happening around you, and I think your patience grows thin.
In the county next door in Dearborn, Army veteran Hassan Nimi remembers struggling to figure out how he was going to keep his family contracting business afloat and his employees working.
When we're worried about feeding our families, they're telling us, well, if it's for your safety, you got to stay indoors, can't work. Where do you kind of bounce between that, following and obeying these rules for everybody's safety or being able to feed your family?
5 years after the pandemic declaration, the divisions over the COVID response here track the national picture. A recent report from the Pew Research Center found that the pandemic deepened partisanship, distrust in institutions, and the fragmentation of our news media. Early on, Michigan saw a backlash to public health measures, with protests against business and school closures by people flouting masking and social distancing guidelines. In the fall of 2020, a group of men were charged with plotting to kidnap Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer for pushing those measures. But away from those headline-grabbing events, residents here took away very different lessons from their experiences.
I was raised that this nation's amazing because it's the power with the people. I mean, our voice matters. And then during COVID, we learned our voice didn't matter. We were told what to do. We get fed up. We're Americans. We know our civil liberties. We hold firmly to them. And then once we feel like they're being challenged, we push back.
Last year, Nimi ran as a Republican for Congress and served as a delegate at the Republican National Convention.
To be honest with you, I think that it smacks of arrogance and it disrespects those who lost their lives.
In Ypsilanti, Pastor George Wattles feels very different about the pushback.
If we're in a crowded theater and there's a fire, you can pretend it's not there, but if you sit there long enough, you're going to get burned. And in my opinion, those who were protesting have the right to do so. Thank God we're in the United States of America. But on the flip side of that, we have to respect the fact that your protest fails to recognize the pain of others.
Kids didn't go to college because of it. We have no idea where they would be today if it hadn't been handled the way it was.
For Holly Valade, her children's struggles in school, one a junior, another just entering preschool,
they really did vilify parents that had concerns,
led her to question decisions made by Governor Whitmer, the local health department, and her local school board, even as she saw different ones being made in counties or districts next door. That didn't end when COVID restrictions eased.
I would say COVID opened a can of worms. I started watching school board meetings because I wasn't sure what was happening with COVID, and I wasn't sure what our school was going to do to keep our kids safe. But watching those meetings really opened my eyes to what was taking place within our school system. we started hearing about bullying that was happening. We started hearing about examples of, critical race theory coming in, of, the LGBT agenda being pushed in the classrooms as young as like 3rd grade.
Maybe if you knew what we knew, you would understand us better. Maybe then you wouldn't be so quick to put us down for wanting to fight for the kids being harmed by some of these decisions.
While Valade became a regular at school board meetings.
As soon as the masking mandate started, we started masking up at the studio. We've always followed the Washtenaw County Health Department guidelines.
Salon owner Ashley St. Clair, who also had young children dealing with COVID restrictions, often appeared as well, speaking in support of the health department.
I understand the frustration behind it, but I also understand why our health officials thought that that was the right thing to do, because they didn't know what to do. They were trying to build a boat while the flood was already here.
Public health is not usually a political issue. It's not usually a partisan issue.
Washtenaw County Health Officer Jimena Lovelock says the pandemic took a toll on herself and her staff as they attempted to navigate an overwhelmed health system, the high number of deaths and infections, staff burnout and turnover, and being caught in the middle of what became an intense political fight.
In public health, we approach this from a population perspective, a community perspective, that we are all connected and our actions can have impacts on the other. And I think that sometimes lack of connection, the challenges that we had even before COVID with greater isolation and lessening social connection, also I think fed into that polarization and those divisions.
I feel like 2020 and the pandemic was a really big tipping point politically for divisions. And I think that those have continued on. When you live in a town like this, you see those people all of the time. But to protect like my own peace, to protect the peace of my family, to protect the peace of my clients and the people who help us keep this business open, there are some lines that just have to be drawn, and it's hard. It is.
Today, everyone seems to recognize that these deepening divisions and loss of trust are problems, even as they are far less sure what to do about them.
There's no reason that this should happen in this manner ever again. Now that we have all the data, there's no reason that we don't go and siphon through all of this and figure out where we went wrong, what could have been done right, and get some of the greatest minds on earth to figure out a plan to move forward on this.
There are going to be situations where we might need to do things to keep everybody safe and to make sure everybody stays healthy. And that trust has been destroyed, and there's been no effort, at least from our perspective locally or at a state level, there's been very little effort to rebuild that trust.
I think that's the challenge that we have in the country now, is there are people who are living different lives and have no frame of reference for what other people are going through and no respect for that. But I think that's where the conversation has to take place.
In our next story, we'll sit down with two people on opposing sides of this COVID divide who are now trying to have that conversation. For the PBS News Hour, I'm Judy Woodruff in Milan, Michigan.
Remember, there's always a lot more online, including a look at Missouri, where a constitutional amendment has made abortions available again more than 2 years after the Supreme Court's reversal of Roe v. Wade. That's at pbs.org/newshour. And that is the News Hour for tonight. I'm Amna Navaz.
I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS News Hour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us.
Major funding for the PBS News Hour has been provided by
On an American Cruise Line's journey, travelers experience the maritime heritage and culture of the Maine coast and New England islands. Our fleet of small cruise ships explore American landscapes, seaside villages, and historic harbors, where you can experience local customs and cuisine. American Cruise Lines. proud sponsor of PBS News Hour.
The Charles F. Kettering Foundation, working to advance inclusive democracies. Learn more at kettering.org.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS News Hour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
Friends of the News Hour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner, and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation. The Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. Funding for America at a Crossroads was provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.